Good morning. Welcome to Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Only announcement, Capitol Hill Terrain Walk is, just as a reminder, Tuesday, August 9th, around 7:30 p.m. We might shift it to 8 o'clock depending on participation. And again, I've got two classes coming in, so I want to make sure I get a good sample coming in. So plan for 7:30. That's most likely the time it'll be. And we'll meet at Capitol Hill, and I'll give you more guidance on that next week. But in your announcements, when you acknowledge, please say whether you can make it, you can't make it, or you can make it over Zoom. So week 4, lots this past week. Iraq WMD, as I mentioned, as you saw, there was failures all across the chain. There's failures in collection. Again, the overemphasis on curveball and the lack of vetting in that respect, the lack of ability to actually collect any other detail, over-reliance on a single source. Analytical failures in negative evidence or seeing negative evidence. And I talk about that in the lecture that we focused on Iraq having WMD or a nuclear program. What we didn't ask is, if Iraq has a nuclear program, why are we not seeing X, Y, and Z? It's a clear analytical failure. Organizational failures. Again, if all your intelligence is dependent on what George Tenet says and what George Tenet thinks, that's an organizational failure. And that's what arguably came across in this. And then the politicization, and the Rachel Maddow documentary goes in detail on that. So you saw in the WMD, the Iraq WMD failures up and down the chain. And then 9/11, you saw the same things. I asked, was 9/11 an intelligence failure? I argue, my opinion, that the lack of knowledge, or that we knew of 2 known hijackers that came into the United States. Our intelligence community knew that, but we couldn't, because of organizational issues and bureaucracy, actually take actions to unravel the 9/11 plot. I think that's the intelligence failure. I cover this a bit. You saw that in National Geographic documentary. But what do you do if they come back and they say, okay, what do you want me to do? Let's say you brief that to the president and he says, okay, you just told me that. What do you want me to do? And the key thing is, I think you're owed, as if you're briefing intelligence, a recommendation in the back of your head to try and be prepared for that question. Organizational issues. And again, the NSA documentary brings this up in detail. We knew that there was communications going on between the 9/11 hijackers, the potential 9/11 hijackers, and a known bin Laden safe house in Yemen. Yet we could not action that. We cannot act on that. And then ask your question. As you saw the National Geographic documentary, where along the chain could we have prevented this? At what point did their actions rise to a level where there could have been an investigation, which I think would have unraveled the 9/11 plot? Where was that? How did they just keep below the radar of our law enforcement agencies so they could essentially go in clandestinely? So that's the Iraq WMD 9/11. As we're coming up, you guys know that the paper is due next Sunday. And I just want to give you some guidance. Again, strategic paper. And you'll see the paper, the description in the week 5 module. So I'll allow you to choose an intelligence issue, or use multiple. Well, you choose either intelligence case study or use multiple case studies that describe a specific intelligence issue. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to talk about the Yom Kippur War, if you want to talk about Pearl Harbor, you can. But we could also talk about groupthink and show how it permeated through multiple case studies. You could talk about poor collection and showed how it permeated through multiple case studies. I'll let you decide, but I can't emphasize this enough. Please don't reiterate the question to me, or just give me an overhash of Yom Kippur War or whatever case study. Please narrow it down to what you think the primary intel failure was. what you think was the variable. And I'm going to cover several here. Please don't repeat these back to me. I'm just giving you ideas here. So you can argue about failures in collection. During the Pearl Harbor case study, we did not know the location of the Japanese aircraft carriers. During the Yom Kippur War, we were over-reliant on Narwan, on one person. And then the Iraq War, again, you just saw that, the over-reliance on curveball. So again, we saw failures in collection in that respect. We had failures in analysis. Again, the Pearl Harbor, we talked about the poor analysis, some of it based on racism, some of it based on negative evidence, some of it based on groupthink. The confessions, all the analytical points that we talked about, groupthink, negative evidence, clientelism, those all came up in the confessions case study, so you can bring that up. And then the Iraq WMD, as I just talked about, groupthink, which caused much of the policy failures. Politicization, Iraq WMD. You saw that in the Rachel Maddow documentary. The confessions, this was, again, arguably clientelism. The need to get a conviction at all costs forced analysis to be bad all across the chain. And then finally, 9/11, as you just saw and you just read in the doll, the information was not coherent enough for policymakers to make decisions. So you have failures in the policy interference, and then the failures in the organization. I just talked about 9/11, Pearl Harbor, as we talked about. There's information collected at the federal level, but arguably, I mean, it wasn't shared with the commanders on the ground. Arguably, that had a contributing factor to Pearl Harbor. And then the fusion centers, as you saw the documentary, this is designed to push information down. So you have all these case studies and you have all these factors here. Please get down in depth on what you think the failure was. Don't just rehash what I just talked about in the lecture. I want you to think where you think the primary failure was. Okay, so that's my guidance for paper 2. Unfortunately, because we're in a compressed class, we have to go right into week 5, and these are the counterterrorism case studies. So Fort Hood, underwear bomber, Boston, and the European Union. The readings will be Fort Hood shooting, and then a Boston Marathon. The documentaries, great documentaries, Christmas Day bomber, and the EU terrorism PBS Frontline. And as you're going through these, ask why, despite the millions, hundreds of millions, billions, depending on how you count it, money spent on counterterrorism, why do we still have Fort Hoods and Bostons and the EU issues? So that's this week. If there's any questions or issues, please let me know.